So in this episode, we're going to be discussing the deeming of the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto as objectionable by New Zealand's chief censor. So Jacob, what are your kind of initial thoughts on this before we get maybe a bit deeper?
Well, my initial thoughts are that should the government have any rule in determining what you should or should not be able to read or consume? Instantly jumping into
Yes,
libertarianism.
Well, that's a legitimate point, and I mean maybe we need to make maybe we need to distinguish here, right? Because the government, I think, should be able to prevent you from consuming certain types of media, right? There are certain types of media that are incredibly objectionable and are a crime in of themselves.
That have
Things like
victims.
child pornography, right? Exactly. That have victims, right?
The thing is, who's the victim of
But-
you reading this?
Well, exactly. That's a very good point. So, shall we kind of get into it a little bit more? So, the chief censor of New Zealand described this manifesto as objectionable. And what that means is that if you possess it, it is now a crime to possess it or to share it, right? And not a small crime either, a maximum prison sentence of 14 years. And so that is quite a significant... It's not just you're being discouraged from reading, it's not just the government's making it harder to find. It's legitimately placing citizens in prison for a long period of time.
It's quite an extreme
for
punishment.
consuming literature. It's a very extreme punishment. It's a long period of time, particularly because in New Zealand, prison sentences are in general quite short relative to other countries. So a 14-year prison sentence in New Zealand is perhaps even longer than it would be in other places relative to other crimes. So, and I think this is very interesting because, first of all, I mean, if we just analyze the sentence, the chief censor has deemed it objectionable. Well, every part of that sentence to me falls apart, right? So first of all, why do we have a chief censor?
Yeah.
So why does somebody, a government agent, get to decide what I can and can't read? Right? Why can somebody ban books?
Seems like that'd be very easy to turn on the populace, assuming your government has a very authoritarian trend.
Exactly. So, a book is condemning the government, right? Think
Censor.
Nikki Haga's publications, right?
Yeah.
Now, well, that's objectionable, right? And then the citizens wouldn't be able to read it to decide themselves whether it's objectionable because reading it in itself is a crime. Right? So it's, as you say, it's absolutely open to abuse. But you know what? Let's approach this from the other side a little bit, right? I can absolutely understand where this is coming from because in New Zealand right now, maybe not in the future, but right now, I don't think our government is seeking to take away all our rights specifically, right? I think it's almost accidental because I can understand the mindset behind this. This shooting was absolutely horrific, right? And this is the thoughts on the topic of the shooter, right? And nobody likes the shooter, right? And nobody likes his opinions either.
Yeah.
Or at least nobody's civilized, right? So it's very easy to get in the mindset, well, this is a terrible guy and he's writing terrible stuff, therefore we should just ban it and no one should be able to read it because the only people who read it would be bad people who like terrible stuff, right? It seems a legitimate way of thinking. Except it goes a bit beyond that because maybe I want to read his manifesto so I can see what sort of heinous stuff motivated this guy, right?
Exactly.
So maybe there's educational value in it, right? And beyond that, even if there was no educational value in it at all, maybe I just want to understand, right? Like maybe I'm just so shocked by the strategy, and I just want to like know what happened and why, right? And that's legitimate. That's a legitimate thing for me to do, right? And I don't think the government should be able to stop me from doing that. And not just stop me, right? Not just like stop it from being uploaded, but imprison me for doing that, right?
It's very harsh just for having some literature. And
absolutely.
Another problem is that the basis for the censorship is actually quite flimsy. I mean, all that David Shanks, the chief censor, says in reference to it is that it's a crude booklet which promotes murder and terrorism, as if there aren't other books that perhaps promote murder and terrorism even more. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is Mein Kampf,
which is not bad, which is sold at Wickles.
Yeah.
Right. But you're right, and it's very interesting because it actually shows, because we talked about the office of chief censor a bit before and why we think it seems ridiculous, and this kind of goes to prove it, where the censor doesn't have to give very much justification at all, right? Like, it would be more understandable if a guy had to publish like a 14-page report with intense justifications and quotes from the literature and everything proving that it incites violence or is hate speech or some such, right?
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He can simply dismiss the thing, say it's objectionable, and give a one-sentence quote to whatever media he chooses, and that's it. There is no oversight, right?
It
And
demonstrates.
because this is...
I'll
Oh, no,
continue.
sorry.
It
Yeah, you
demonstrates a
speak.
complete lack of trust between the government and its populace when he says that it is aimed at a small group who may be receptive to its hatred, racist, and violent ideology, and who may be inspired to follow the example set by its apparent author. It shows a complete lack of trust that the government is essentially willing to bar this information from spreading at all costs because they're scared that New Zealanders might actually be convinced by it.
And beyond that, right? Beyond that, he makes the argument, the totally wrong argument, that the only people who would want to read this are people who would be swayed by it.
Hmm.
What about what we just discussed before, where perhaps you just want to understand, you want to see what it's all about. That doesn't make you a bad person.
Yeah,
right?
whoever reads Mein Kampf is
And that doesn't
automatically
make
a
you
Nazi.
receptible. Exactly. Right? So it's like saying, say we redo that argument. The only people who would read Mein Kampf are people who are already receptive to it.
Hmm.
That's absolutely false. Right? In fact, let's take this thought experiment a little bit further. How many neo-Nazis do you think have read Mein Kampf? People who are actually Nazi. How many people of them now do you reckon have read that book? Very, very few. But how many Jewish people do you think have read that book to understand the hatred against their people?
Probably a lot of
right?
normal
To
people
understand
because
the
it's
mind
like
it came from.
common literature you read in like high school and stuff.
Absolutely, it's a recommended text in a lot of Israeli high schools, right? So what I'm saying is that there are a lot more reasons for reading this sort of terrible literature, right? As terrible as it is, more than I sympathize with it and I want to emulate it, right? So our censor here is taking an incredibly narrow view of it, right? A deliberately narrow view, I think. And so I think that this is kind of yet more virtue signaling to the world. Like, look at us, we're so good, we don't tolerate this. But actually, we're not so good because we're using government power rather than the actual will of our people.
It's quite strange, though, how those who have made the publication, those who have the publication for legitimate purposes, such as reporters, researchers, and academics to analyze and educate, can apply for an exemption.
Right, and who gets to decide what's a
purposes.
legitimate purpose?
Exactly.
Right?
Is it not legitimate
So
for
now
me to know about the person's intentions?
Absolutely. And so what it means you can only ever get the information third party. Like, as a third person, right? So you can never read it yourself. The only way you can get information on it is through a government-approved source, right? Someone who got approved, right? It sort of reminds me of, the Bible pre-printing press, pre-translation, right? Where it's like, we'll tell you what's in it, right? You don't get to read it. No, you don't get to read it. We'll tell you what's in it, right? And of course, I want to make it clear, I'm making no comparison between this manifesto and the Bible in terms of content, right? Only in terms of how they're distributed, right? Because if somebody can't read something, right, then you can tell them what's in it, and they won't be able to tell you you're wrong, right? So the New Zealand government now can say whatever they want is in that manifesto, right? For whatever purposes they might wish, right? And we as the populace would have no way of proving them wrong because it's illegal for us to even look at it.
It's Orwellian, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's truly ridiculous, and I think that this stroke should lead to some more introspection by New Zealanders into what the chief censor does, or what the censorship office does, and why we have one. Because it definitely goes beyond this specific issue, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg, if you will.
It's quite sad if you think about it that this has always been present in New Zealand law. This has always been in New Zealand. As in, the same with the people being imprisoned or attempted to be charged for spreading the video, the racial disharmony law that we've already discussed, and this has always been there, like lying in wait, ready to be sprung in New Zealand law, but they haven't had a reason to flex it. And as soon as they were given a reason, they immediately jumped all cannons, just firing censorship, ban, imprisonment, racial disharmony laws. It's actually quite shocking. How suddenly it's flipped from essentially being, from my perspective, quite a free country to suddenly just censoring everything.
Absolutely, and as a New Zealand citizen, it's quite a worrying sort of trend because you wonder. Because in this case, I mean, as I've said before, this shooting was terrible, and we can understand a lot of the mindset behind, behind what's happening. But it just makes you worry is if things can change so quickly, right? It makes you worry. If say there's a bigger tragedy in the future, right? Say another terrorist attack that's bigger even, right? What happens then? How much worse does it get? And at what point does the infringement of our rights become so severe that it's worse, right, than what would have happened had the rights not been infringed. And I think that in this case, how many people do you reckon would have read this manifesto and be like, yeah, I'm gonna go shoot someone now? I
Well,
think
obviously not many, given that it's already been spread quite far and wide, and we haven't had
exactly.
a second shooting yet.
Yeah, I think that this ban is sort of symptomatic of the New Zealand government's disregard for the rights of its citizens. Because as you say, it's just designed to, like, yeah, we don't trust people, right? We don't trust our citizens, you know. They can't look at this stuff. It'll scar them. They'll turn evil if they read it, right? Not they'll read it, they'll realize it's insidious, but they'll understand more and then they'll delete it, right? The New Zealand government does not trust its citizens to do that, and therefore feels the need to hide from them this sort of information.
It's a nanny state approach. So anyways, I think we've pretty much wrapped this
absolutely.
up, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think once again, because we don't see eye to eye on all topics, but I think on this particular one, as well as the previous one with the racial disharmony, we can both agree that the New Zealand government is overreaching its legitimate functions quite significantly. Okay, well, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
Farewell.